Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the matrix. What did we suggest Taylor do? Does anyone remember? We suggested that she focus on the surveillance footage from the neighbor's security camera. That reveals everything you need to know. Some claim that the footage was not clear enough, Oh, it's too blurry to determine make and models in that footage. It was even stated that this is what law enforcement also claimed about the neighbor's camera footage. All bullshit garbage? That footage is definitely clear enough to determine what type of vehicle enters and leaves the neighborhood, but it also would spot everything else related to the case. And this is why they are avoiding it, because it would show that Koberger was never in that neighborhood. I wouldn't be surprised if someone leaked out footage from Indian Hills showing a white Hyundai Elantra speeding down the road. Yep, as we pointed out, the judges are not budging in this case. And Taylor is trying to be diplomatic and cordial in an environment that is trying to send Koberger off to a firing squad. You have to be more strategic in how you attack because it's the state versus Brian Koberger, meaning the defense is going up against an entire state with the federal government and judges who basically appeal to the states. An uphill battle in general, but in a quadruple homicide? Penetrating that wall, you have to use psychological methods to break it down. Don't misunderstand our take. Taylor has been doing a decent job in defending her client. Yet there comes a time where you have to just come out and say what needs to be said. And she has never stated verbatim that her client has been framed for the murders. She alluded to it, and in the court of law, the allusions are met with straightforward retorts, you see. For example, her alluding to Koberger being framed, based on the FBI's secretive work regarding the IgG process. The judge retorts simply by saying, how does Koberger's rights get violated if his DNA is discovered at the crime scene? She can't really contest it unless she does what? States that the DNA discovered at the crime scene is not her client's. That is how you meet the judge head on and go from there. But the prosecution isn't playing fair whatsoever. Well, they are mere puppets anyway, as it's the FBI who guided the investigation in the shadows. And the judges are conditioned to only focus on evidence, not what is speculated. Yet let's review what has happened recently. Our source is from a news article in Spokane, Washington. Quote, judge denies Koberger defense's multiple motions to suppress evidence and search warrants. An Ada County judge has denied multiple motions by Brian Koberger's defense team to throw out different pieces of evidence and search warrants. Koberger's team filed numerous motions to get evidence thrown out, including cell phone data, genealogy data, and arrest warrants. Okay, let's stop here for a moment. Now, if Taylor wants all of this thrown out, then what is she expecting the judge to conclude here? This is what we were pointing out in the prior episodes regarding the hearings. If you want all of this thrown out, then you're basically wanting the charges to be dropped against Koberger. And since we know Taylor stated Koberger had no connection to those housemates in prior hearings, then everyone would conclude that she is telling the judge her client has been framed for the murders. You see, stating that Koberger had no connection to those housemates, which there hasn't been a motive established for the accused also, then you keep attacking from this angle. Focusing on the FBI's slimy work will get exposed in due time, but the primary focus is to establish that Koberger was not physically in that neighborhood. This is not something you can tiptoe around with, because there is DNA involved. Yet let's continue. Quote, last month, Judge Stephen Hippler heard arguments on whether to throw out DNA evidence data that law enforcement used to determine Koberger as a suspect in the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. Judge Hippler denied the defense's arguments that pulling and using Koberger's DNA was a violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. Again, we stop here. As we pointed out, attacking the DNA head-on is not how you expose the frame. If someone is being charged with murder, and there is a claim their DNA was discovered on a knife sheath at the scene of a crime where victims were stabbed to death, you're going to have to make a detour, okay? In other motions, the defense sought to have cell phone location data and subsequent warrants used by law enforcement to arrest Koberger thrown out, but the court found the warrants were lawfully obtained and did not violate Koberger's rights. Judge Hippler also denied the defense's motion for a Franks hearing, which determines if investigators lied or omitted information to obtain warrants. Unquote. You see, what did the judge do here? Shut down every motion that Taylor has presented. And all of the judges have been shooting her motions down. It's nothing new in this case. That's why we stated she needed to step back and realize the common practice will not fly in the courtroom. Think about what the judge shot down here, especially the Franks hearing. That really puts it all into perspective in how the judge will preside over the case. They don't care about what unlawful actions were committed. They don't care about Koberger's rights. They don't care about Dylan's conflicting accounts. They don't care about the bloody DNA left by other males at the crime scene. They are hardwired on a guilty verdict against the defendant. And I don't think Taylor truly grasped this reality. See, there is a gray area here. Without a motive established for the murders, either from the defendant or even in the perspective that Taylor is saying Koberger is innocent, there has to be a motive for those murders. And this is connected to Koberger being framed, you see? But if she can't establish he was framed, this trail to the truth will not be accessible in trial. So what are you left with? DNA of the defendant discovered on a knife sheath in one of the victim's bedroom. Everything else is water under the bridge to a judge and jury. But if the prosecution is forced to provide visual evidence from the neighbor's security camera, well, things may turn upside down in the courtroom.
Exactly. Let's rewind back to a prior hearing from the same news station. Quote, surveillance videos under scrutiny. The defense first called Brett Payne to the stand. He's employed by the Moscow Police Department and served as the case agent. The defense focused its questioning on surveillance cameras collected from homes and businesses as police looked for a suspect and tried to track a white Elantra, believed to be the suspect's car. Defense attorney Ann Taylor indicated that some of those videos have not yet been turned over. I need to know where they are, Taylor said. Payne referred Taylor to the evidence custodian in the case, then said, a lot of video surveillance has been collected in the case. Thousands? Taylor asked. Easily, responded Payne. Taylor focused on US 95 heading south out of Moscow and implied that video taken in that area has not been turned over. Prosecutors asked Payne if all the relevant evidence had been turned over for discovery. He said it has, but Taylor pushed back. As the lead agent and the lead department, is there some kind of inventory that will help me understand what you have and why you don't have relevant timeframes? Taylor asked. Payne again referred Taylor to the evidence custodian in the case. When questioned by the state, Payne said they don't believe Koberger necessarily left Moscow heading south on US 95. Payne said they were not able to obtain surveillance video from that area. Are you testifying Mr. Koberger did not use US 95 south of Moscow? Taylor asked. Payne indicated there were several routes he could have taken, and that police are not sure which route he would have taken. Unquote. Okay, we stop right here. There are a few things that need to be addressed, including a stumble by Taylor regarding surveillance footage. I guess we have to spend some time in Moscow, it seems. Let's go back to the map. Since Payne claimed Koberger didn't necessarily take US 95 out of town, we will show the alternate paths out of Moscow. First, we display the alleged path, based on the claim the vehicle was spotted on Indian Hills Drive. As you see, the path passes the mobile gas station, which is alleged to be his vehicle speeding down White Avenue, then onto Highway 8, then US 95, and then onto Pullman on 270. Okay, now there is another path out of town, which is more discreet. I guess that's what Payne alludes to here. The other path, the vehicle doesn't exit on Walenta Drive, instead on Taylor, then Nez Perce Drive, which turns into Perimeter Drive, which turns into Farm Road, then hits Highway 8, onto 270, then back into Pullman. Let's track that path. It would seem more evasive. But what's the point of trying to be evasive driving a light bulb at night? But anyway. Okay, keep in mind, Payne stated law enforcement couldn't obtain surveillance from US 95. But that's a bit odd, isn't it? Because all of the camera footage would be traffic cams, which we all know local and state law enforcement has access to those cameras. I mean, crap, if someone can leak out surveillance from a gas station or an apartment complex, surely law enforcement has access to those files during the so-called escape from Moscow by Koberger, right? Anyway, let's look at the traffic cameras in the vicinity near Highway 95. Keep in mind, the highway splits into one-ways briefly. There are 10 traffic cams with one cutoff screen here near 270. In fact, there are more traffic cams if we zoomed in, of course, to every intersection. But this is good enough for our analysis. First, you have the traffic cam on Sweet Avenue. This cam would be the first camera that would have spotted Koberger leaving the neighborhood on US 95. Then you have the traffic cam on Troy Road. Then you have the traffic cam on 6th Street, but this is on a one-way heading south. Nevertheless, they would spot Koberger's vehicle heading towards the home. But next, you have the traffic cam on Washington Street. This would be the traffic cam that would capture Koberger leading into a straight shot heading out of Moscow. Then you have the traffic cam on Jackson Street, again capturing Koberger speeding by, right? Then you have the traffic cam on Line Street, then the traffic cam on Stadium Drive, then the traffic cam on Farm Road, and finally the traffic cam on War Bonnet Drive. But was he just running red lights? Quite suicidal if you ask me. Heck, it was suicidal to walk into a house full of college students with a fucking butter knife. Okay, I'll let my colleagues take over. I'm a bit agitated.
Butter knife, that's priceless. But it's the equivalent of how a lone killer wouldn't be able to complete that mission with a knife. Too many variables to each encounter. We went over this already, which also supports our theory that it was a group effort. Running red lights though, We know another vehicle that matches the description of the suspect's vehicle was found crashed and abandoned in Eugene, Oregon. Now that vehicle could have been running red lights like crazy until they ran into a brick wall at an intersection. Mind you, the vehicle was in the middle of the intersection, then moved to the side of the road. We don't know exactly when the vehicle had the crash, only when it was discovered and so-called investigated soon after. Something tells me that the crash occurred somewhere else, and then the vehicle was towed to the nearest intersection. In fact, we suggested that in our investigation. Let's break down the so-called incident again. It was stated that the female was working, then had a car accident. In fact, it literally states that she had a, quote, work accident, unquote. Work accident? Was she wait for it, a DoorDash driver? Or even a private driver? If your vehicle is linked to your work, and you have a, quote, work accident, there are only a few occupations that involve a vehicle. And we just listed 2 of them. Getting the feeling here that Moscow PD already knew Bonnie and Clyde were involved early on and covered for their getaway dummy car. We're just trying to make sense of all this nonsense. Eugene PD claimed that there was a homeless man inside the vehicle. But if you have a car accident and you have insurance, do you just leave the vehicle without having it towed? Here's what I think. The vehicle was a hot potato, meaning it was handed off to someone in Eugene, Oregon. Heck, who knows? Bonnie and Clyde may have just left the vehicle with the keys inside, and someone just went driving and crashed it, such as the homeless man that was temporarily living inside. Remember, law enforcement had to look up the registration info and contacted the female about the vehicle. So in that time frame of inspecting the vehicle, there wasn't any inquiries about it being possibly involved in the murders. They bypassed this even prior to contacting the owner. If you find a white Hyundai Elantra crashed and abandoned in another state, which matches the description of a suspect, the first thing you will do as law enforcement is factor in that it's crashed and abandoned. This is a key attribute of someone fleeing a crime scene. That's investigating 101. But of course, we're expecting corrupt law enforcement to do the right thing. Our bad. The point, though, is Payne claims to not have access to the traffic cams and not knowing which route Koberger, well, if you don't know which route he took, then where are you tracking him from and to? Payne is guessing on which route Koberger took, yet you would literally know which route he took due to all the traffic cams arriving in Moscow and departing. But let's address the stumble Taylor made in that prior hearing. Taylor focused on US 95 heading south out of Moscow and implied that video taken in that area has not been turned over. How is this a stumble? Well, this is not a request for surveillance footage from the neighborhood. You have to address ground zero, because there may be another white Hyundai Elantra zipping around in Moscow, you see. But in the neighborhood, you're at the scene of the crime to determine if Koberger's vehicle was there. And also, another white Hyundai Elantra may have been spotted, but at a different time frame, which creates all types of problems. Because then, if Koberger's Elantra isn't there, based on the alleged time frame he entered and departed, but another white Hyundai Elantra is spotted at, let's say 1:57 a.m. or 2:45 a.m. or 4:35 a.m., times that don't coincide with Koberger's path. This means there is another suspect and simultaneously exonerates Koberger. Here's the interesting thing, though. We have to assume that Taylor has surveillance footage of a white vehicle driving around, right? Perhaps not all of it, but she has something at this point. Now, the important question here is if Cy Ray claims based on Koberger's cell phone data that he wasn't in Moscow, rather traveling in the opposite direction, then what surveillance footage does the prosecution have that has been handed over, which is credible to Taylor? And if it isn't credible, then Taylor should be even more focused on the neighbor's camera to expose Koberger was never there, physically in surveillance. Does everyone understand?
The alibi was that Koberger was driving around late at night and went to the park to stargaze. Of course, the likes of old hag Nancy Grace made a mockery of it. But not everyone is running around on TikTok making useless 10-second videos. Some people appreciate nature, and even more so, escape the stresses of life through the peace and quiet of a late-night drive away from the city. Now, based on Cy Ray's examination, which he claimed is exculpatory, Koberger was traveling in the opposite direction upon the alleged time frame and path law enforcement reports he traveled in. Now, the problem is this has been proven in court, but for some reason, it has not been held up in court. Let's look at what he stated in that hearing. Quote, after Payne stepped down, the defense called on Cy Ray, a consultant who is an expert in geolocation and analysis of cell phone records. Now, briefly, we never covered this, due to not really caring about the hearings much. Yet we glanced at it, of course, while we were working on our other series. Ray told the court Thursday he's been called as an expert witness many times, but this is the first time he's testified as a defense witness. He said his role in the case is to analyze all the geolocation data, focusing first on Koberger's device. Ray said he focuses not on the metadata of the phone, who someone called their social media activity, etc., but where the phone was located and how it traveled there. In a previous court filing, defense attorneys said Mr. Koberger intends to offer testimony of Cy Ray to show that Brian Koberger's mobile device was south of Pullman, Washington, and west of Moscow, Idaho, on November 13th, and that Brian Koberger's mobile device did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman highway in the early morning hours of November 13th. Thus could not be the vehicle captured on video along the Moscow-Pullman highway near Floyd's cannabis shop, unquote. Now what stood out here the most to you all? I'll give you a hint. Thus could not be the vehicle. Yep, there was another white Hyundai Elantra, which hauled ass out of Moscow and driven to Eugene, Oregon. This is the vehicle spotted. And the prosecution is not confident, of course, with the surveillance footage that has this white Hyundai Elantra spotted because it was in the neighborhood at different time frames than what law enforcement claimed the alleged Koberger's Elantra was spotted. And that turns the case upside down, of course, because there is another Elantra introduced into the picture. Let's focus on the alibi for a moment. We didn't do this due to our other series, but now things are getting tighter in the courtroom. The alibi, of course, was Koberger drove late at night and intended on stargazing at a park called Wawawai County Park. Based on Ray's analysis of Koberger's geological location, he was heading south of Pullman and west of Moscow. Let's look at the path. As you see, the path is in fact southwest of Moscow, heading towards the park. Now, if Koberger left his home around 2:40 a.m., and that travel is approximately 30 minutes, this places him at the park around 3:10 to 3:15 a.m. Then heading back to Pullman is another 30 minutes, which gives us a time of about 3:40 to 3:50 a.m. roughly. Although it's only 9 miles from Pullman to Moscow, that's an additional 20 minutes roughly. It's already 4 a.m., and then the travel to the home is another 10 to 15 minutes. Physically impossible to arrive in the neighborhood around 3:29 a.m. Yet again, Judge Hippler disregards the cell phone data which tracks Koberger's travel that night. They won't loosen their grip on the defendant, so Taylor has to force them to do so by demanding the neighbor's surveillance footage be presented. Because at this point, Taylor is in a jam because there's nothing else left but to focus on that surveillance. They've shot down the motion to suppress the IGG process, shot down the motion to suppress the search warrants. The state is showing Koberger there's no way out of a guilty verdict. And this is why she needs to just scream to the judge, can the prosecution provide footage of my client's vehicle in the neighborhood during the time frame of the murders? Now this would be hard for the judge to deny that motion, because it focuses directly on ground zero, and if the defendant's vehicle was physically there. The pressure upon the judge to give Taylor some type of breathing room would force him to show fairness in confronting the prosecution. Everyone is waiting for that specific footage anyway. From the public, true crime investigators and commentators, the families interested in the hearings, friends, and even the corrupt mainstream media. Sure, she can deal with this during the trial, but trust me, the way things are going now, with all the shutdowns, it doesn't bode well going forward. You want to have momentum going into the trial, not be on your back feet struggling to defend your client. As we mentioned, the prosecution is willing to present the Linda Lane surveillance as evidence Kohberger's vehicle was present. And although it could be seen as inconclusive to many, that vehicle is there during the time frame the murders occurred. They may even present the gas station surveillance as evidence also. And this is why Gray Hughes leaked it out. He's showing everyone what the prosecution will be presenting as evidence against the defendant. But what they won't leak out is the surveillance footage from the neighbor's security camera. Oh yeah, claiming it's difficult to identify vehicles in the neighborhood. Yep, damage control. And that damage control is executed to protect the actual white Hyundai Elantra that was spotted in the neighborhood in different time spans throughout that night. Bonnie and Clyde were there, and we all know they have a significant part played. Payne claims he didn't know which route the vehicle took. Translates to, Bonnie and Clyde were driving that white Hyundai Elantra, but it's at a different time, and also Kohberger was not even in Moscow. So of course, I'm not sure where the hell Kohberger went. I just know his vehicle was spotted on camera. Can you provide the evidence? Sure, just give me a moment. Oh, talk to the evidence custodian. They'll provide you with it. But you're the one claiming the vehicle was present in your testimony. Don't you have the proof? You see, his testimony should have been deemed non-credible because he's claiming the vehicle was spotted, but isn't providing the evidence to back it up. He's referring the defense to the evidence custodian to verify his claim. And it's because Bonnie and Clyde were the drivers of a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra, found crashed and abandoned in another state, which is about an 8-hour drive from Moscow, and the housemates, or Dylan specifically, waited 8 hours before calling authorities, allowing the dummy vehicle to get the hell out of the hot zone. The front door was open, which indicates someone had left the home. Something tells me it was Bethany, who had got the hell out of there, and Dylan was left to deal with the situation. Nobody knows exactly how the night unfolded. Regarding Bethany and Dylan, we don't know how the following morning unfolded neither. Yet if that front door was open, and Bethany's room was on the first floor, it's logical to suggest that she had left the home, with her exculpatory evidence. Taylor should be in a position of dropping a nuclear bomb on the state, with all the proof Kohberger had been framed. A slow and painful reality for the prosecution to endure, just like Kohberger had to experience for over 2 years. The boomerang has blades at the ends, and well, heads will roll once everything is exposed. This is the chaos sector,